Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for joining me here today. If you've been enjoying my content, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. That would mean a lot to me. But even if you're just here watching, I do really appreciate you listening to my recommendations and hanging out with me. Today's video is going to be something kind of fun. Some of these books I've read and some I have not. We're getting close to spring. We've finally reached the point of spring ahead, right? So technically we're getting more light in our day, but that meant we lost an hour of sleep the day that happened. But I'm incredibly happy that we are getting light past, 5 p.m. So spring is coming. I'm so excited to plant my flowers and just enjoy some warmer weather. My goodness. And because of that, I thought what a fun thing to do a spring reads book recommendations type video for all ages. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some children's books, YA book, book for adults, kind of like middle grades. Personally, I think it's very limiting to think about books as solely for one age group. Some of these children's books I'm going to talk about are, I think, have wonderful lessons and seem very warm and cozy, and a lot of times are just as valuable to me personally as some books, for adults or, YA level reading. So I really did try to include something for every age range in this video. So if you have kiddos and you're trying to get them to read and you think that they might be interested in some spring themed books, hopefully we can find something for them in this video. And without further ado, I think I'm gonna get into it. I'm gonna go age range, so I'm gonna start with the kiddos and then go all the way up to adults. I have two books to recommend in the 4 years to 8 years age range. That's what these books are marketed towards. Again, I still love these books and I'm 26, so there is no right age for books, but if you do have kids, if you're thinking of trying to come up with something for the springtime that, can help them learn a little bit about flowers, about nature, about the spring season, about history, I'll explain. These two would be for you. So the first one is actually my favorite book from when I was this age. It actually has a sticker on the front because I've had this since I was probably 4 years old. But again, this is marketed 4 to 8 years. It's called Linnea in Monet's Garden, and the art on this is just so beautiful. This is the sticker you can ignore. That was just me and my 4-year-old self manhandling my books. But anyway, this is such a good read for the spring. You learn all about plants, but even more so, it's about this little girl who loves to garden, and her upstairs neighbor is a retired gardener, and they end up going on a trip to Paris to see Monet's garden. And we learn all about Monet, all about different types of plants in the garden, a bit about Paris. The illustration in this is just so cute. So this is an example of some of the flowers they see, and it labels all of them. My personal favorite page is while they're at the garden. I find this one quite funny. That's pretty adorable, but they talk all about the garden, about the flowers that he grew, about his painting, about Paris. It's a lovely historical informational read, but also just very fun for spring flowers. And I was always fascinated by this book, and to this day Monet is still my favorite artist. I actually have a framed print hanging in my house. If your kiddos are interested in art or in flowers at all, if you're trying to get them into something for spring, this is a really lovely read. This came out in the 80s, so this is not by any means a new book. I think it actually, when I looked it up on Amazon just to see if this was even still available, they had a 25th anniversary edition. Lovely book with a lot of history, a lot of information, but also obviously a really fun story for a child to latch onto. This is one I highly recommend. And the next book is much newer. I believe this came out in 2022. Same age range, 4 to 8 years, but this is called The Fairy Garden. Honestly, I picked this up because I just absolutely loved the illustration in this. When I saw it online, I was like, I need to see that in person. A lot of times I find the artwork in children's literature to just be phenomenal. This book is about a story of a little girl who loves to garden, and she wants nothing more than for fairies to visit her garden. And essentially she learns how to make that happen and why it wasn't happening before. But again, the illustration in this book, the story itself is beautiful and very cute, and definitely has a lot of, I think, positive environmental impact, because it teaches about, you know, what to and not to do in the garden to get the fairies, but really, you know, butterflies, that sort of thing, in your garden. But what drew me in initially, and what just absolutely this book does so well, is just the illustrations are phenomenal. Like, look at this chair. It's just so lovely. And then in the back, there is a few pages of how to start your own fairy garden. So again, if you have a kiddo, I can imagine this would be a very fun activity, how to grow a fairy-friendly garden for the spring. I think that would be a lot of fun. And they even have some instructions on how to make some fairy houses. This is another good example of, I think, something that would be a really good, really fun spring book, but also activity if you wanted to, you know, make a fairy house, or, you know, focus on any sort of gardening and that sort of thing with your kids. Those are my two for the 4 to 8 year range. Then I have one which I would say is probably like 9 to 12 for the age range. I'm very excited to read this one. Yes, the next book is roughly 9 to 12 years. I think this is going to be such like a cozy fantasy. If you're an adult that really enjoys cozy fantasy, I think this would probably be a good read. And if you're a kid who's just really into nature and fantasy stories, I can imagine this would be lovely as well. So it's called By Ash, Oak, and Thorn by Melissa Harrison. The illustration on this, again, just beautiful. So beautiful. It is a chapter book. This one is about 3 little people no bigger than your hand that live in the forest and in this old ash tree, and their names are Moss, Burnett, and Cumulus. And basically they go on a little bit of an adventure because Cumulus, the oldest of the 3, something starts to happen and they need to figure out why Cumulus is fading away. The trio leave their beloved home in search of answers, guided by birds, stars, and wild creatures. It's a fantasy with our 3 little friends right here. And again, this just screams spring to me, not only because of the forest, but just like all the creatures. Again, I think this is probably a really sweet, like cozy fantasy, early grades chapter book. Yes, I haven't read this yet. This is on my list of books to read this month. I'm very excited to finally read it and enjoy some of the forest and spring vibes that it is giving just upon first look. I'm excited about this one, and I will be reading this soon. The next book I have is actually a YA book. So I would say like mid-teens, so like early 20s. But again, I just read this and I loved it. This is called Things That Grow by Meredith Goldstein. I bought this used on Amazon, so it's actually an old library book, so it has like a cover on it, so I'm sorry if there's a lot of glare here, but again, it's called Things That Grow, and it's just such a pretty cover. This one I did just finish reading. Lovely book for spring. It's about this young lady who is going into her final year of high school when her grandmother passes away very unexpectedly. And so it's about her grief. It's also ends up being a little bit about these gardens that she and her family ends up visiting, because that is where her grandmother wanted her cremains dispersed. This book obviously is dealing with grief, but it's also very funny. The humor in this of our main character is top tier. So a lot of good like life lessons about change and like dealing with family issues and that sort of thing. But it's also a really good spring read. You get to visit like I think 4 different gardens in this book, and there's a lot of stories obviously that go along with those. So teenagers, early 20s would probably really love this. Just again, such a nice spring pick-me-up for those who enjoy things that grow. And the last book I picked up for this video is called The Garden of Small Beginnings by Abby Waxman. And I'm going to be reading this in my next reading vlog. I'm so excited. But again, I picked this up used on Amazon. This is a novel about a widowed mother who has 2 girls and is dealing with the grief after her husband's death. And she illustrates textbooks and garden related things, I believe. But with that job, she gets access to a gardening class, and that's what this book is about. She and her girls and her sister all join together and they go to do this gardening class at the Los Angeles Botanical Gardens. And that is the premise of this book. This is actually not the cover that I thought I was getting. Again, when you buy things used on Amazon, you don't always know what you're getting. But the other cover, if I can find it, I'll put a picture up here for you to see, because that one was a really cute digital illustration. I was really hoping to get that cover, honestly. I thought for spring will be such a cute read. We're dealing with gardening, we're dealing with flowers. Apparently there seems to be a theme with flowers and grief in these last 2 books. This one also is said to be quite funny as well. So again, we're dealing with heavier topics, but in a little bit of a lighter tone, I believe. I'm really excited to read this, and I will be reading this probably in the next video you see. Keep an eye out for that. Those are all of my book recommendations for all ages for the springtime. Again, I really think it's limiting to think about books as for a super specific age range, and I will be reading or have already read all of these. And the first one that I talked about, Linnea and Monet's Garden, is actually like probably my favorite book of my childhood of all time, and I still browse through it and read it to this day. All of these are great spring reads if you're looking for something to try to kind of fit with the season. I think any of these would be great options for you. And yeah, I think that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you click that subscribe button. It would mean a lot to me, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.